Welcome to the Fire and Earth podcast with your hosts, Jason Mefford and Kathy Gruber. Fire and Earth, giving you the keys to unlock your limitless potential.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fire and Earth podcast. I'm your co-host, Kathy Gruber.
And I'm Jason Mefford, and today we have a mutual friend. But what's always interesting, right, is it's like Kathy and I have known each other for years. We've been doing this podcast for years. We both know Robert, but we didn't know that we both knew Robert. So here we go.
Here we go.
I am not going to sing "It's a Small World" after all.
Thank you.
No.
La 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 la.
No, and your viewership will hit end if I start singing.
So we have Robert Grossman with us, a fellow speaker as well. So we're all in the National Speakers Association. That's how we know each other, because we're all here in the LA area as well. And excited to have you here with us today, Robert. So welcome.
Now, this is a lot of fun. What a great way to end the week.
I know. Well, yeah. For most people, they don't know, but we record these usually Friday mornings. So we like to have.
My apologies.
What? Oh my goodness! These are not live.
The veil has been lifted, and well,
emotional intelligence number 101. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm so excited. So the way I met Robert, and I actually don't know exactly how I met you, but one day it popped into my inbox. Hey, I'm doing a webinar on psychological safety, and that's something that I talk a lot about. And then I did it, and it was great. And I think I emailed you and said, "Hey, I loved your webinar." And then I got another one for emotional intelligence, and I went, "Oh, the other thing that I love doing." So and I'm a lifetime learner. Like, same thing with Jason. Like, this is why we love doing the show, because we get to meet or re-meet so many people and learn new things. So can you tell everybody at home who's listening, what is emotional intelligence and what is psychological safety? Because I don't think a lot of people know exactly what that is.
Sure. And I'm going to use some very simple definitions. So with emotional intelligence, the simplest definition, or the way I like to describe it, is recognizing that we are emotional beings. That, in other words, our brains are designed to respond to life's events emotionally first. And recognizing that our emotions are not always accurate, and then engaging our rational brain, which would be the prefrontal cortex, to make sense of what's actually going on so we can respond versus react to situations. Now, psychological safety, the definition of that is really eliminating fear from companies and from teamwork, meaning that we want to create an element of radical candor so team members feel free to speak up and share their thoughts or challenge ideas or report things that need to be reported, such as mistakes, promptly, so corrective action can be taken immediately without the fear of ridicule or humiliation or any other negative impacts.
Yeah.
So those two really do go hand in hand.
Absolutely. So you mean we shouldn't tease and bully our coworkers because they have a stupid idea?
Well, I mean, you can
only on the podcast can I do that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I got a quick story to share, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm working with a group of leaders at a pharma company, and we first talked about psychological safety, and then we went into emotional intelligence. And one day during a coaching call, one leader said, something just happened this week that I have to share with you, Robert. And I said, well, what happened? Because while I was delivering a presentation, I misspelled a word in my presentation twice. And one of my team members pointed it out to me in the room in front of everybody else. And I said, oh my gosh, what happened? He said, well, what I wanted to do was respond in a kind of snarky, ridiculing way, but I heard you instead. And I took a deep breath and I simply said, thank you for letting me know. I appreciate you supporting me to do a better job, and I will definitely fix it at the end of this presentation.
Nice.
Right? And so he said, number one, I did feel like I knew I wanted to respond a certain way, but I chose not to. If I had responded the way I wanted to respond, I would have broken trust and reduced psychological safety. But instead, he believes that he improved trust and improved psychological safety. And I agree with him 100%. He did a great job in that situation.
Yeah. Isn't it the greatest compliment as a speaker or a coach when your client says, and I heard your voice in my head? Because I have clients that they're like, what would Kathy tell me? What would Kathy ask in that situation? What would Kathy think I should do in that situation? I love that. That means we're doing our job. That's fabulous. What a great story and a perfect illustration of psychological safety.
Yeah.
Well, and two of the emotional intelligence side
Yeah.
of it, right? Because I know I talk about that some as well, because I think that, I mean, there's a couple areas where I'd love to go. One is emotion in business, and a lot of people say, well, you can't have emotion in business, and I would say bullshit, and there's a good reason for it. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But the other thing too is we throw out emotional intelligence, but to me, a lot of it too is about maturity, right? And about being more mature emotionally, right? And so just like as we're little kids, right, we grow up, we act really immature, and then we become adults, right? But most people never become adults emotionally,
Yeah.
right? Because they're not mature emotionally to be able to recognize it, like you said. And our first knee-jerk reaction might be to just lay into that person, right? Like, how dare you,
Right.
embarrass me in front of everyone else in this meeting, right?
Yeah.
But that's really an immature way of responding, right? Like you said, it's more recognizing, responding instead of reacting, because usually our first reaction is not the right one.
Right. And there's another part of this that also explains what you're sharing, Jason. And I left it out of the initial description because it goes a little bit deeper. And there's a little part of our brain called the amygdala. You guys heard of the amygdala?
Oh yeah.
Right? And so, many people watching this podcast might have heard before of the amygdala hijack. Right? And so what happens is that when we feel threatened, whether it's real or perceived, our amygdala begins to flood our bodies with chemicals like neonepinephrine and cortisol, which are the stress hormones, to get ready to either fight or flight, right? And I said perceived, which is so important, right? And for example, if you're going for a hike and you're walking through the woods and you hear a rustling in the bushes, you might think there's a Bengal tiger sitting in those bushes and it's going to come out and eat me, right? Well, we all know that there's no Bengal tigers, and most likely it was a squirrel. But the minute you start to think that it's something that's going to hurt you, right, you all of a sudden your heart rate increases, your jaw tightens, you go into tunnel vision. And that's what happens if you're in a conversation and somebody says something that you perceive as an attack, which happens probably 90% of the time, right? And so that's that dynamic of conflict.
Yeah. It was to that point. I was on a scuba diving trip in at the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Wow. And I'm paddling along and I'm looking around, and all of a sudden something jumps at me out of the side. I start screaming into my rag, bubbles are going everywhere. And I realized this piece of hair that Jason and I always joke about, I had stopped and the hair kept going. So in my periphery vision of the goggles, it looked like this thing was coming at me. It was my own freaking hair, but I had a panic. But as I kind of should have, because it's like, something's attacking me underwater. We do that all the time, right? We jump at the garden hose. We see the cat's tail flicking. We think it's a snake, whatever it is. That's the innate thing that we do.
That's right.
And as emotionally intelligent beings, we then get to evaluate that situation and go, oh, that was a stick. Okay. Right. So our boss saying, I want to see you first thing Monday morning, that's not fight or flight worthy. Because it's not an actual physical threat, right? It's we have this all weekend long. Oh my God, what do you want? Did he find out I was taking Post-it notes?
Right, unless you think you're going to be fired or demoted or something.
Right. Well, that's we don't know. We do the what ifs all weekend.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't know. We call that mind reading and fortune telling.
Yep, and those are cognitive distortions that we try to avoid.
Yeah, it's funny. I got a quick story. So in 1984, I was traveling abroad as a medic on a group, and I was bit by a snake. Ooh. And it was a pit viper, and it almost did kill me. Okay, almost did kill me. So now fast forward, that was 1984. Fast forward to 1996 or 97, on my honeymoon down in Costa Rica, and we're in a remote location. And the guide said, "Let's go on a nighttime canoe trip up this river." Right. So I'm in the back, of course, of the canoe, and you see little lives all over the place, and all of a sudden, I see something out of the corner of my eye, and I yell, "Snake!" And we start paddling really fast. It was the rope. So I know what you're saying.
Yeah, you're like, it's gaining on us. It's gaining on us.
Well, yeah, and especially, I mean, because we can laugh about it, and it's always, in hindsight is always 20/20, right? That's what they say. But because you actually experience a physical trauma of being bitten by the snake, that was programmed in your subconscious. And so again, when the amygdala sees something that it believes is a snake, you especially are going to freak out because you've actually experienced it before.
That's correct.
That's right. Correct.
So so there's the challenge, right? So if we have a history of abandonment, of breakups, of bosses who are jerks, we're trained to react in that same way. That's the pattern that's in our brain. So how do we step out of that pattern and start to up our emotional intelligence? What can we practically do to help ourselves?
Sure. Well, step one is awareness that you're having. So let's define something. I call, I have a model called the response chain, and the response chain starts with what's called a key moment or the event and what happened, right? And that key moment or event is just the facts, just what happened. I was cut off in traffic. Not I was cut off in traffic by a jerk. I was cut off in traffic. Right?
We know he was a jerk. That goes without saying.
Right. And so when we experience that key moment, we have thoughts about it, and those thoughts are not always accurate. In fact, oftentimes they're not accurate. But where do we get our thoughts from? Well, they come from really the first step, which is our paradigms, how we see the world. And step two is understanding that how we see the world, let me rephrase that, how we experience the outside world may not be accurate as to how the outside world is actually occurring. One example of this is, I show up to work, and this is pretend that we work together, right? I show up to work, and Jason shows up to work, and I say, "Hey, Jason, good morning." He goes, "Robert," right, and walks away. Right. And I turn around and say, "Man, God, that guy Jason, he doesn't like me." And Kathy, who's more emotionally intelligent, says, "I wonder what's going on with Jason today." Right. Same exact situation.
Yeah.
Right. Just two different responses. And so we have to understand that we don't experience the world that actually occurs. So what do? We practice what I call distortions in our reasoning. So we have the key moment, we have an experience it, we have thoughts, and then we look at our thoughts and we say, well, number one, am I catastrophizing this event, making it bigger than it is? Am I mind reading? Am I fortune telling? Like I already know how it's going to turn out. Am I personalizing it? Am I labeling it? There's a whole list of these things. And so we call this the 4-box exercise, where we take the meaning of the key moment. We take the key moment and then the meaning of it. Then we figure out what distortions we might be using. When we remove those distortions, then we get down to possibly the true meaning. And so if we change our thoughts about it, it's critical, because our thoughts actually determine our physiological, emotional response. And then based on our emotional or physiological response, we then act out or have certain behaviors. And then those behaviors really do determine whether or not we are reacting or responding to that key moment. And then there's one more step in this, and that is, well, how do we interrupt this in the middle? And again, step one is awareness. And I tell my clients, don't worry about interrupting it. Just start naming your key moments. And then as you get a little bit better at this, you can take a deep breath. Right. And know that you're responding in a way that you don't want to. So take a deep breath. Or if you have time, go for a walk. I play the Doobie Brothers if I have time when I'm stressed about something. And it's you said in the very beginning that you and Jason are lifelong learners, and so am I. And developing your emotional intelligence is a lifelong journey.
Yeah. This sounds very similar to cognitive restructuring, which is something that I learned when I did a bunch of mind-body stuff at Harvard. And that's something I sit down with my clients and do, right? It's like, what is the thing that happened? How does it make you feel? What emotions are you having? What physical are you having? What are the distortions? What would you like to feel? And then what is kind of the solution to this, which is, well, what can you do? And how do you help get rid of those distortions? So I love this. And I love that you shortened it, because the cognitive restructuring chart is like eternal, so that's a great, I remember in your webinar, you going through that, and it's so helpful, because it's something once you do a couple times and actually write it out, you start to automatically go, oh, I'm doing that thing. What is this moment? How do I feel about it? What are the distortions? So it's great, a great practice to get into.
And that's where we want people to get to, right? About 4 years ago, I was hired by a company in Poland Actually, they're all over Eastern Europe to do a workshop with their engineers, software engineers.
Mm.
They were interfaced with US-based project managers who didn't have the best, friendliest personalities, and these Eastern Europeans were, pretty laid back, and they were taking it personally. And after working with them for 2 days, and I went back a week later, the CEO took a screenshot of his Slack channel. And I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but somebody made an emoji out of my face. And that's what they were using when they're having a key moment. They put my face in
Wow.
the Slack channel, right? So we got them speaking the same language, and that
Yeah.
on a team, that's critical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I know because you bring that up too, that there's, the one other thing, because I was just coaching somebody who was of Russian background, right? And so again, a lot of times there are these cultural issues, Eastern Europe versus US. It's not even just, our perceptions can be completely off base, right? Because of our background, because of those paradigms and the beliefs that we end up having over time, even because of the culture where we're from. That can be geographic, like where we grew up. It can be cultural within a company, as well as to when people do that, this is what they mean, right? And they're all things that we've learned. And so you throw that other kind of layer of culture on top of it, and it's like, well, that's why we each see that triggering event completely different, because we're all coming at it from a different angle, and we all have different experiences.
Right. And those paradigms are made up of everything you just said. You can throw in religion, you can throw in political background, origin of birth, which you did say that already, and so many different factors, right? Just like what you said earlier, Kathy, if you grow up and people are breaking their promises, chances are you're going to have a stronger reaction when somebody makes a promise and they don't fulfill on it, or even if they make it, you might say, yeah, right. You're going to do that. I don't trust you. Right. Whether that's they say it out loud or they say it in their mind.
Yeah, interesting. So I have a question for you. And I've talked to a lot of people who, or, read a lot of stuff about psychological safety, especially in the workplace. So it's great to have someone like you or us, Jason, come in and teach the company how to do that. But what if you're already in a company where you're on the staff, you're an employee, and you don't have psychological safety there? How do you manage being in a place where you do have a narcissistic asshole boss, or you do have coworkers that are behind your back? How do you survive that other than just up and quitting?
Well, so in my opinion, before you can even talk about psychological safety, we have to work on emotional intelligence, right? And so if you're in we'll call it a hostile environment or an uncomfortable environment, number one, you need to be able to not react to what's going on around you, right? So psychological safety is not an individual thing; it's a team thing. It's actually an organizational wide thing. Right. So I just can't, hey, I'm psychologically safe, right? I'm open to everything. But then, somebody else on my team or my manager or their VP is not.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't, it can be disruptive in that sense. So before we can even move towards psychological safety, there's some other steps as well, too, that we need to develop teams in. So like if a company thinks that they can watch a video on psychological safety and then they can be psychologically safe, they're foolish, and they're going to waste money on that, because it is based on human to human interaction.
Yeah.
Right. That is the basis of psychological safety. So
well, I think that brings up an interesting point too, of what you said, because I think a lot of times when I talk about emotional intelligence, people are like, oh yeah, my boss needs to be more emotionally intelligent. Right. And they always want somebody else to be the one that changes. But like what you just said there, right? If you're in a toxic environment, it all has to start with you. Right. Correct. And if you are more emotionally intelligent, more mature, even if everybody else around you is acting like a little whiny bitch, sort of thing, you can have some solace in how you're responding and how you're, taking those distortions or paradigms and changing them to where you can actually still survive and thrive in an environment like that, right? Because you're like, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? Sort of thing. So even though all this shit is going on around you, you don't let it stick to you, or you don't get attached to it,
Yeah.
and you don't react to it that way. And I think that's one message that a lot of people need to hear, because too often people quit their job and they move somewhere else, and they've never worked on themselves enough to be mature enough, and sure enough, they show up in some other place.
Right.
I promise you folks, there's immature
Same
people
thing.
everywhere you go. And so
Yeah.
if you're letting those other people affect you, it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if you move jobs, the other people are going to affect you. You got to change yourself first, right?
Yeah.
That is where we typically start, because almost everybody says, "Oh, my coworker is this and that, and they really piss me off." And if we can't get past, there's nobody out there, it's only you, right? You're not going to change anybody. You're not going to fix anybody. All you can do is develop yourself to the point where you are responding, right? And that might mean that you're not engaging that level of behavior.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're right, 100%. There's a great story, Jason, that I use in one of my workshops. We talk about probably sometime in history, where a traveler comes to a new city, and there's a wise man, and he says to the wise man, "What kind of people live in this city?" And the wise man pauses and says, "Well, what were the people like where you came from?" And he said, "Well, they were evil and spiteful and conniving and this and that." And the wise man said, "Well, that's exactly who lives in this town." And then an hour later, another person comes by and says, "Hey, wise man, what kind of people live in this city?" And he said, "Well, what were the people like where you came from?" And he said, "Well, they were wonderful, nice, kind, giving, and generous." And he said, "That's exactly what you'll find in this city."
Yeah.
So that goes back to the paradigm again. That goes back to what you look
Sure.
for, you will find. So if you believe all bosses are terrible human beings or terrible animals or monsters, then no matter where you go, you're going to look for it and you're going to find it.
Oh, sure. You're going to absolutely find what you're looking for. Well, and what is the thing? If you're unhappy in a situation, you have three choices: change the situation, leave the situation, or change yourself.
Right.
And you can't always leave, and it's very hard to change the situation. So all you can do is continue to work on yourself. So
Right.
That's a good point.
Exactly.
Well, now, and I know we're coming up towards the end, so I wanted
Already?
to I know the time goes by pretty quick, doesn't it? So I wanted to make sure and get this in too, because I know, especially when it comes to business, and I know you work with people in businesses, so do I, so does Kathy, but there seems to be this in belief that, again, I think is wrong, but of where we can't let emotion enter into the workplace, right? And I know the pendulum kind of swings back and forth a lot of times, to where, okay, maybe sometimes we're a little too rough when it comes to sexual jokes or whatever else, and so we swing the other way, and then we become so prudish, right? And it feels like, especially in organizations now, it's kind of like that, where, well, we can't offend anybody, you can't express any emotion, right? Because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You can never say anything that isn't politically correct. And this emotional intelligence idea and psychological safety really does kind of roll into all of this as well, right? I mean, and it feels like if we're too sterile, then we stop being humans. And how can we stop being humans without some serious psychological effects to ourselves?
Right. I think that there's an absolute place in all of life for emotions, right? Including the boardroom, including the manufacturing floor, or wherever it might occur in a business. The thing I think where we need to distinguish this or draw a distinction is healthy versus unhealthy emotions. So, for example, if I said, Jason, what you shared during that meeting made me feel sad, right? That's an emotion, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? If I said, "Hey, Jason, you were an asshole by what you said, and you made me sad," well, then now we have a problem, right? But to say that made me sad, because really what companies are looking for now, everybody's talking about empathy, to be empathetic.
Yep.
Right. And if you're an emotionalist, you can't be empathetic.
Yep.
Right. And so if I was coaching you and you said this team member came up to me and said that, I would coach you to turn around and say, I hear what you're saying, and I understand that I really made you sad. Tell me more about that. Right? Versus, well, don't be so sensitive.
Yeah.
Right? Right? What? So tell me
Pussy.
what happened. Right? What happened? Tell me what happened. Right? So one is you're being hooked, and the other are reacting, and the other you're responding. I mean, let's face it, we're emotional beings, and if we stifle our emotions, I mean, then what do we become? Psychopaths? Right? We have no feelings at all. Feelings are important. It's just a healthy expression of those feelings and
Right.
understanding that there's a communication process that we have to also be responsible for. So how we speak is important, and not getting hooked and reacting is important. So
Yeah.
if we're emotionalists, I would hate to work in an emotionalist environment.
Yeah.
Did that
That's a
answer your
good.
question, Jason? I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, no, and what's interesting
Sorry,
is
Kathy,
because
go ahead.
Oh,
the
okay.
the choice of the word that you use there too kind of hit me as one of the light bulb things too, right? Is it's like the people who don't feel emotions are psychopaths. So if we're encouraging people or thinking that people at work or anywhere else shouldn't feel emotions, and we're trying to get them to throw that away and never have that, then what we're effectively doing is trying to train or make everyone psychopaths. And that's
Or
a pretty
robots.
or
Yeah.
robots, and that's a pretty
Yeah.
scary place to be, right?
Yeah.
Is we don't want people to be that way. And so if we throw out all the emotions and we don't know how to deal with it, we turn into psychopaths, and we do things that we don't want to do,
Right. And
right?
here's
Which have a bigger damaging psychological impact on people than actually
absolutely.
expressing the
Yeah.
emotion.
And here's what innovative companies are looking at now. They're looking at a relatively new domain called total worker health, which includes emotional well-being as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's a big component of total worker health. So one of my other very large clients is the employee health and safety department for a large Fortune 500 company, right? And they're implementing total worker health in their organization. It's not easy, right? I mean, it's a path, it's a journey, right? But we have to pay attention to that, Jason, for the very reasons you just expressed, right? If we don't acknowledge our humanity, then you're not bringing everything to work. If you have to stifle your emotions, you're leaving part of yourself at home and not bringing the total you to work, which then leads to more creativity and discretionary effort and those types of things that we all want on our teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I was just going to add to what you guys were just talking about. I had a conversation with a client the other day about anger, and they said, "Oh, I know it's bad to get angry." And I said, "Well, frankly, there are things we should get angry about." I said, "It's about how you express that anger and what you do with that
You
anger.
deal with it.
If
Yeah.
if you go screaming through the office and you're throwing things off desks and name calling and punching people, probably might want to rein that in. But if you have that feeling of, wow, I'm really angry, what made me angry, what can I do, and you go through that flow of what was the inciting incident to this. I mean, I think we've all had an occasion where we're suddenly just either angry or like anxious about something, and it's like,
Yeah.
I've always gone back to, what was I thinking that made me have that feeling? Oh,
Right.
I was thinking about having to pay that big bill, and I wasn't sure that if I had the money for, okay, that's what that was. Taking that emotion back to what sparked it, I think, is so important. And I don't think it's a good thing to stuff anger. I think there has to be ways to process it in a healthy
No, you
way,
have to. You have
or
to.
else you're going to explode one day and you're going to be on the news, and we don't want
I'm
that.
I'm I'm working with a client right now that has been out having little outbursts, some bigger outbursts, and he brought it back to something that happened with one person 8 years ago that was
Wow.
left unresolved. So
That'll do it. That'll do it.
yeah,
And of course, we are out of time. God, we could talk to you all day. We'll have to have you back on, and we'll cover
wonderful.
everything else. So much good info. So if people want to reach you, do any of your programs, have you speaking, what's the best place to find you?
I'm going to give you 3 different ways. Number one, and this will cover everything, my website, which is www.blackdiamondleadership.com.
Mhm.
My email is robert@blackdiamondleadership.com, and call me direct at 818-231-5238.
Beautiful. I love it. So reach out, get a hold of Robert. This has been great. And it's so funny, we all know each other and didn't know.
If they go to the website, they can sign up for, register for our email, so they'll know about our future upcoming webinars and workshops and things like that as well.
And they're so good. This is why I asked you on the show, because your webinars were so good. They were quick. They're informative. I love the PowerPoint that the graphics that you use. It was great. It was great.
Thank you.
Final thoughts, Jason?
Well, I think this is, again, like you said, we could talk about this more, and we're going to have to talk about more of it, I think, too. But to me, again, I mean, there's people are stressed out. People hate going to work, and a lot of the stuff, I see people jumping jobs, jumping companies because they're trying to run away from something. But the problem is you can't run away from yourself.
Yeah.
And so just like you said, Robert, I love that story about, somebody coming into the town and asking the wise man what kind of people are here, because you will see, you'll see, or whatever you're looking for is what you'll find.
Yeah.
Right. And so, again, if you want to change your world, change the world around you, a lot of times you got to do the hard work on yourself. Right. But we got to start having these discussions, because if we don't, then things are going to keep going the way they are, and people are going to still be depressed. They're going to be, having all these things, popping pills just to try to make it through the day. And it doesn't have to be that way. Right.
100%.
There's ways to change it. So
I agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yay.
This is really a lot of fun, you guys. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm Kathy Groover. I could be reached at kathygroover.com.
And I'm Jason Mefford. I can be reached at jasonmefford.com. So go out, have a great week. Start responding instead of reacting. Get a little bit more emotionally intelligent. Reach out to Robert. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Fire and Earth Podcast.